Today, Pastor Matt and I are concluding a sermon series called Hope Win, and we've been talking about issues of loneliness, failure, etc., all those positive things. And if you've missed a Sunday or you'd like to check back in, these messages are on our YouTube channel, or perhaps you know of someone who could benefit if you shared it with them, so we invite you to do that. So for today's message, I need everybody to have a couple of pieces of chocolate. If you don't have a desire for chocolate, we will pray for you. I'll invite you to pass that around to figure out why your soul is so twisted. Just kidding. But even if you don't like chocolate, take a couple of pieces because you'll see later in the message today. I want to show you a video, and it's a real neat video about a coffee house in the Chicago area and something that they're doing to help their neighborhood and their community. Watch this.
It is called Sip of Hope, and while the coffee is good, it is the conversation at the tables that sets this cafe apart.
It doesn't matter who you are, where you come from. 5 out of 5 people have good days and bad days. It's okay not to be okay.
Johnny Boucher opened Sip of Hope in honor of those who will never get the chance to pull up a chair.
I personally have lost 16 people to suicide, and the overarching issue that they all faced was silence.
His antidote, a place to talk through those dark moments without judgment. A cafe serving up a cup of joe,
medium nectar of the gods,
and compassion.
The goal was always to meet people where they're at and not where we expect them to be.
At the front, a wall full of resources.
Thank you. Sorry.
And behind the bar,
You can talk to our baristas. They're trained in mental health first aid. And then on top of that, the coffee's great.
Ryan Shannon is now a regular.
Every day's still really a battle.
The Navy vet says to him, depression equaled weakness.
I came home and I wasn't the same. My physical injuries, my leg, and traumatic brain injury and things like that really took its toll. I fought it for 2 years.
The former collegiate athlete not only unable to stand, but find his way back.
I wrote my suicide note. I had a plan. Suicide doesn't discriminate. It doesn't.
Shannon says it was his wife who saved him that day simply by listening.
Holy cow, I'm not alone, because you do feel very, very alone.
Why aren't we talking about this and learning from it instead of, losing them and then just thinking that we have to live in silence and beating ourselves up that maybe we could have done differently?
Since then, Shannon has gone on to clean up in adaptive sports, winning a gold medal in Warrior Games, silver in track, and finishing his MBA.
All those things I did that people are calling me a warrior and all this stuff for, all that happened after the day I decided not to complete my plan.
These are my daily reminders. You get what you give. In a country where we talk about building walls, we need to build more tables and more seats.
A seat for anyone in need of more than just a strong cup of coffee to make it through their day.
I still have bad days, but I now understand that you can climb back out of that. You're not in the dark room alone. There's a lot of people around you that care.
It is one of those things we just don't talk about, but the numbers are continuing to rise. In fact, nationwide, suicide rates are the highest recorded in 28 years. Through a partnership with Dark Matter Coffee, Sip of Hope donates 100% of all its proceeds, all of it going to mental health education for suicide prevention. Aaron Ivory, WGN News.
If you or someone you know needs help, the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline offers crisis counseling free of charge every day of the year. The number 1-800-273-8255, or you can text the word HOME to 741-741.
It is called Sip of Hope.
I'd like to visit Sip of Hope myself. It sounds a lot like church to me, with a little bit higher end coffee. Coffee that's not free, I'm sure. But what they do offer freely is some hope, and that's a wonderful thing. Twice in that video, the question was asked, why aren't we talking about it? Why don't we talk about it? And we're going to talk about a hard subject a bit today. Brian Boucher, the owner of the Sip of Hope, said that in his life he's had 16 people who were close to him who died of suicide. That's way too many, isn't it? And yet I'll have folks in my life, and you'll have folks in your life. My best friend from high school, Maurice. One of my cousins. Just before I moved here, one of the pastors who I supervised, her husband. I was the second person to arrive at the house. It's a hard subject to think about, but it's something that we need to think about and talk about. In the United States, from 2001 to 2017, the suicide rate has increased 31%. It's increased from 10.7 persons per 100,000 to 14 persons per 100,000 who have committed suicide. In other Western countries, the rate is dropping. In the United States, the rate is rising. If you're a male in the United States, it's 4 times more likely that you will commit suicide than if you're a female. There are certain populations that are more vulnerable than others in the United States. Native Americans, white men my age and older. Those two populations, 30 per 100,000. It is estimated that among the suicides of teenagers, 25% are of LGBTQ persons. There are certain groups who will struggle more with suicidal ideation, suicidal thoughts, behaviors. Persons between the ages of 18 and 25, about 10% of that population thinks about, is thinking about, is behaving in ways that are suicidal. Persons of mixed race in the United States, about 10%. That's scary stuff. How does this happen, and why does it happen? If you've zoned out for a little while, I'm going to invite you to come back in real close here. It is possible for any human being to get trapped in a feeling and in thoughts of hopelessness across the socioeconomic, racial, age, etc. It is possible for any human being to get trapped, let me phrase it like this, to get hijacked by thoughts and feelings of hopelessness. I hope no one ever here has been involved in a hijacking, but in case you don't know what it is, somebody jumps in your car and they steal it, and sometimes they've got a person, they've got you in it. And sometimes thoughts and feelings of hopelessness jump in your life and steal you and take you to a place that's so difficult, a miry bog, as the scripture said this morning. And this can happen to anyone. One of the things that Pastor Matt and I have been trying to communicate during the past few weeks is that we need to challenge our own thinking at times in our lives. There may come a time when you or when we're caught in a rut, in a circle of thoughts that are not good and not healthy, not where we need to be. And we don't have to believe those thoughts. We can challenge them, we can fight back, or we can find the help that we need to challenge those thoughts. I've been reading a great book by Dr. David Burns. It's a New York Times bestseller, Feeling Good. I'm sure you've heard of it, John. And he says this: research studies have shown that your unrealistic sense of hopelessness is one of the most crucial factors in the development of a serious suicidal wish. Because of your twisted thinking, you see yourself in a trap from which there seems to be no escape. You jump to the conclusion that your problems are unsolvable because your suffering feels unbearable and appears unending. You may erroneously conclude that suicide is your only way of escape. If you have had such thoughts in the past, or if you are seriously thinking this way at present, let me state the message loud and clear. You are wrong in your belief that suicide is the only solution or the best solution to your problem. Let me repeat that. You are wrong. When you think that you are trapped and hopeless, your thinking is illogical, distorted, and skewed. But it's possible for any human being to entertain, to feel hijacked by illogical, distorted, skewed thinking. But we can talk back to those thoughts. We can find resources of hope when we feel those things and think those things. And we can be resources for each other. Did you hear that there at the Sip of Hope, the baristas have gotten a little training in mental health intervention? We're going to do a little bit of that this morning with our congregation here. You have received with your bulletin one of these pamphlets. Could you find that for me? We're just going to walk through it. These pamphlets come as a gift to us from Barry Fawcett, who's the director of Prevent Suicide West Virginia. We greatly appreciate her office sending us these. If you would just open that up, and let's just see what's inside there and resource ourselves just a little bit. Over on the far left-hand side, you'll see the title, Recognize the Signs, and they give us a nice little acronym to help us remember what the signs could be. The acronym is the path warm? Starts with I, ideation. That is thinking, talking about, or writing about suicide. If you or someone you know is having ideation, there's one sign. If someone has a substance use disorder problem, then that's another sign. If they're talking, acting as if they don't have a purpose, if anxiety is just washing over their lives, if they say they feel trapped or they feel hopeless, those are other signs that we need to pay attention to. If you have someone who is withdrawing or has unexplainable anger, if someone is engaged in reckless behavior or their mood changes quickly, is the path warm? Knowing that can help us to know about ourselves. Oh my, I've been hijacked. I need some help. I need some conversation. Or if we have someone that we care about and love, someone that we're in relationship with, and they're exhibiting a number of these signs, then we know that we need to pay close, serious attention to what's happening in their life. If you would look at the middle column, this is very important. When we recognize the signs in our lives or in someone else's life, what do we need to do? Well, we answer the question that was on the video. Why aren't we talking about this? We need to talk. A recent study showed that persons in the LGBTQ community who are youth, if they have an adult in their life who will talk to them, 40% decrease in the possibility that they'll take their own life. We need to talk and use the word suicide. Are you thinking about it? Do you have a plan? Using that word can disempower the thinking and the plan, help to disempower the thinking and the plan. Over on the right-hand side in that column, once we see the signs, once we initiate the conversation, the frank and honest conversation, the caring and compassionate conversation, we may need to take some steps. Again, we have an acronym, REACT. Restrict the means. That's why we're giving away gun locks today. If you are a male and you're thinking about suicide, chances are, overwhelmingly, you're thinking about using a gun. Even if you're a teenage male or you're my age or older. Grandparents, if you've got some guns in the house, I'm going to invite you to take a lock home with you today. Restrict the means. Next, emergency contacts. Work to identify personal and traditional points of contact, including a 24/7 resource. You can see that there's the number at 1-800-273-TALK, where folks can get 24/7 conversation and help, trained conversation. We offer some points of contact, emergency contact here. Pastor Matt and I, our depression and anxiety group that meets weekly, Celebrate Recovery, where we have a plan in place if someone is struggling with this. This is a resource for you here. We provide access to resources, community resources, not just the 800 number, but there are folks in our community who are willing to help. On February 9th, we're going to have the former director of the West Virginia Coalition to Prevent Suicide here on Sunday evening from 6 to 7:30. He's going to be teaching a class on suicide prevention. There's another resource for you. We may need to help create a plan, work with this person to develop a personalized plan. Sometimes the feelings come and go, the thoughts come and go, and are heavier at other times than others. And so if we can develop a plan, who are you going to call? Are you going to call me? Here's my number. Here's the 800 number. Where are you going to go? That sort of thing. And we may need to make a treatment referral from the contacts and the resources that we know. This is a bit of training for us. I'm going to invite you to take this home with you and to put it in a place where you know it's going to be there so that you can access it and so that you can be a source of hope for someone else and perhaps even for yourself when you feel like you're the one who's in the miry bog. So each of you got some chocolate. Has anybody ate it yet, or is it melting in your hands? Here's the story behind why I'm giving you a couple of pieces of chocolate. This is an amazing story. There's a French poet. Her name is Francine Christophe. And a few years ago, she was a part of a documentary on what it means to be human, because her poetry speaks to that topic. And she told a bit of the story of her life. She was born in France, and when she was 11 years old, the invading Nazis captured her and her family and many of the people that she knew, and took her and her family to the Bergen-Belsen concentration camp, 11 years old. She said that in France, the Nazis allowed some captives to take a couple of things with them. She said one of her neighbors quickly grabbed 2 handfuls of rice and shoved them in her pocket to take with her to Bergen-Belsen concentration camp. She said that her mother quickly grabbed 2 pieces of chocolate and put them in her coat pocket. And once they got to the concentration camp, her mother pulled them out in order to hide them under the bunk. And she whispered to Francine, "Francine, I've brought 2 pieces of chocolate. When I see that you are at your lowest, I'm going to give you these 2 pieces of chocolate. Okay?" Francine says that in a few days, other folks were brought to Bergen-Belsen, one of them being a very, very thin, very pregnant young woman. So thin, they did not know if she could carry the baby to term. But she went into labor. They didn't know if she would survive or if the baby would survive. But they took her to a private place, and one of the Jewish captives was going to help in the delivery. And Francine's mother whispered to her again and said, "Francine, do you remember those 2 pieces of chocolate?" "Yes, Mama." "Would you mind if we gave them to this young woman? It might be the thing that keeps her alive. She may need a little strength." "Yes, Mama, please do that, please." And so Francine and her mother took those 2 little pieces of chocolate to that young woman. She ate them. She delivered her baby. She did not die. They brought her and her baby back to the bunkhouse where all of the women were. The baby was wrapped in rags. And for 6 months, that baby never cried. Never cried. Tiny, emaciated like everybody else in the camp. After 6 months, the camp was liberated. And when the U.S. Army, I think it was, entered the camp and secured things, that skinny mother took her baby and unwrapped those rags. And Francine says the baby cried for the first time. So Francine was telling this story to her granddaughter. And her granddaughter says, "Mother, wouldn't it have been so helpful for you and for the survivors of Bergen-Belsen if that day when you were liberated, you had counselors and therapists and doctors and people you could talk to and sort things out?" She said it would have been wonderful, but we didn't have those kind of people. We had to figure it out on our own. But you have given me a great idea. And so the famous, now famous poet says, "I am going to sponsor a lecture, and we will invite survivors from Bergen-Belsen and any other concentration camp from all over the world to come and to meet with counselors and therapists and folks who can listen and hear the stories and offer help." And she did, there in France. She created this lecture, and amazing professionals came, and survivors came. And finally, after years, they got some good conversation and some help with what they had endured. And Francine was kind of the final keynote speaker who shared some of her poetry. She finishes and she steps down to greet some of the folks that she was with in Bergen-Belsen, hadn't seen in years, and others. And as she was greeting people, a young woman comes up to her, reaches into her pocket, and pulls out 2 pieces of candy. And she said, "Francine, I was the baby. Thank you." I cannot imagine a more hopeless place than Bergen-Belsen. Can you? But hopelessness does not have to win. Hopelessness does not have to be the final thing. With some listening, with a little bit of resourcing, with the ability to help someone address their own thoughts and feelings, with a community of compassion, perhaps with a couple of pieces of chocolate. We can join God in the miry bog of people's lives and say, no, your thinking is wrong. Your plans are all wrong. Can I help you to find hope beyond today? You are well worth it, my friend.